These are some of the best ways to release your first rib so you can finally get rid of that nervy arm and shoulder pain. Starting with one of the easiest techniques, and that is using a band or a strap. What you're going to want to do here is basically take your band and step through it going at a diagonal pattern with one side of the strap on your shoulder and the other side on the opposite foot. You can see how I get into this. I first put it over my shoulder and then I bend over, push the band down with my hands, and then step on it with my foot to create that tension. Now, once you have that tension, you're going to allow it to gently push down into the shoulder, into the clavicle and all that to try to help open up the tissues a little bit. While you're in this position, you can also take advantage of this pressure and take your arm and your neck through different ranges of motion. This can include things like tilting your head to the side, rotating it, taking your arm up and down, or doing a combination of the two. Now, if you don't have a strap, then try a massage cane in order to release your first rib. What you're going to want to do here is take one end and place it right there in your upper trap area where you can actually try to get between the clavicle and the back of the scapula. Now from here, let that arm go so you can gently pull down into the traps and into that area with your other hand. And now from here, take your limb through its full ranges of motion, meaning take your arm up and down and your neck out to the side and back. This might be a little more effective if you're doing it on the floor, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But first, let's try a different technique. Again, pulling back to the strap, but this time we're going to be using a small ball. What you want to do is get back into the same exact position where you have tension on your band, but now you're going to lift that band up a little bit, place your golf ball right there, and then let it apply pressure again. This is pretty much like a nice little massage technique that you can do that is pulling down, applying pressure into that area. And again, as you take your arm through its full ranges of motion and you flex your neck around, you're going to be able to feel a difference here. You're going to be able to feel the tissue slide and move, which therefore is going to help open up the space. Now, if you don't have any of these tools, then another option you can do here is just simply grabbing a stick. This can be a broomstick. This can be a stick you use in your window, whatever you have available. What I like to do here is basically place the stick into the corner, take my upper traps and place it into the end of the stick, and then I use my feet to push into the stick to apply pressure into it, and then I go through my mobility drills in order to move the arm and the neck. Now, a nice little trick here is try to continue to press upwards into that stick as you do the mobility. It's going to feel a little different. It's going to feel a little off. But again, if you take it nice and slow, you will begin to feel the tissues open up. All right, now that we're done with some mobility drills, there's some other ways we can actually release the first ribs, and that is by releasing the tissues, the muscles that actually attach to it, with the first one being the scalenes. If you didn't know, your medial and anterior scalene actually attach to the first and second rib, which means if they get chronically shorn and tight, thanks to overuse, thanks to chest breathing, thanks to just being stressed out, they can actually pull those ribs up into that clavicle and therefore create that compression and that pain. So a few things we can do here to release the scalenes is to start off by just warming up the muscle for about 30 seconds. You're looking for the most tender spot as you're warming up the muscle, and you're also just trying to get blood flow going there. But on top of that, we can also do what's called a pin and stretch. Look for that most tender spots, pin it down, and then stretch that muscle in the opposite direction in order to help lengthen the tissues and release them at the same time. And besides the scalene, you can also work on the subclavius. This is a tiny little muscle located underneath the clavicle and attaches to the clavicle and the first rib, which again, if it gets tight and shorts thanks to overuse, working on the computer, things like that, then it can end up creating some kind of compression, which therefore creates your TOS pain or just nervy pain in general. So to work on this muscle, I like to kind of lean my arm forward a bit, which pulls that clavicle out, and that allows you to get deep and underneath the clavicle. Again, I'm looking for the most tender spot, and once I find it, I'm just going to perform little small micro movements by going back and forth to side on it, basically trying to rub out the pain a little bit. On top of that, we can also do another pin and stretch technique here. What you want to do is pin down that area and then take your shoulder and roll it forward and backwards, side to side, as many different kind of movements you can try to do here. The goal is to try to pin down that muscle underneath the clavicle and then shrug your arm, which is then going to move the clavicle with it. Now, working on the muscles are great and all, but what if we can actually just work on the clavicle itself? Now, fair warning, this is a little more dangerous, we'll say, but not necessarily, as long as you're taking your time and paying attention to what you're doing, because there are a lot of nerves and blood vessels that you can very easily feel when you go actually inside the clavicle, which means you have to be a little careful and start off with gentle pressure as you do this. If you're not sure you can do this, or if you're just nervous, then don't do it, or let a doctor or professional do it for you. Like, here's what you want to do. You basically want to get inside the clavicle. We first went underneath. Now we want to go over the top and try to open up these little tissues in this triangle as well. So I like to, again, just lean forward a bit, which pushes that clavicle away from the rest of the body. And then I kind of dig in there a little bit to try to get in those tissues. So right now I'm just at the edge of the clavicle. I'm just pushing down and I'm just trying to basically rub it out. I try to think of it as separating the clavicle from the rest of the tissues, even though that's not necessarily what you're doing. You're just trying to open space and you're trying to create that extra room for those nerves and blood vessels to move through. So the whole idea of this is the opposite of the subclavius release. We're just releasing the top version now, the top of the clavicle, as opposed to the bottom, which means we can still do different techniques here. If I find a nice little tender spot here, I can then just do some micro movements by rubbing back and forth and side to side, or I can even do, again, another little pin and stretch by rotating that shoulder through its full ranges of motion. Releasing your first rib can be a little tricky, but if you try out one of these different techniques, I'm sure you'll be able to create some kind of space and hopefully alleviate your pain. But if you're still not sure what you're doing, or if you just want different ways to get rid of that TOS, then make sure to check out the video in the top corner. I'll see you over there.